So imagine you're standing on a medieval battlefield. Just mud and chaos everywhere.
Oh man, a totally terrifying place to be.
Right. And on one side of this field, you have a gleaming knight on a charging warhorse, totally driven by honor and duty.
The classic image of medieval warfare, yeah.
Exactly. But then on the other side, you've got this battle-hardened mercenary who is quite literally just there for the jingle of coin.
Just fighting for a paycheck.
Yeah. And that brings us to the mission for today's deep dive. We are looking at the historical text Steel and Coin, the duel between knights and mercenaries.
Which is such a great source.
It really is,
Yeah.
because today we're using it to settle a massive historical heavyweight debate. Who is actually the stronger warrior?
It's the ultimate question of the era, honestly.
And I'm just going to put my flag firmly in the ground right now. I am taking the side of the knight.
Oh, really? Okay.
Oh, 100%. Because when you strip away all the Arthurian myths, you are looking at pure kinetic power, elite status, a lifetime of hyper-specialized training.
I mean, I hear you, but I will gladly take the side of the mercenary.
Really. The guys who just fight for cash.
Yes. Because I'm arguing that practicality, raw strategy, and just basic survival instincts ultimately win wars.
I just don't see how a ragtag group of freelancers beats a knight.
Well, by the end of this deep dive, you'll see exactly how the rise of these paid soldiers didn't just, win a few battles. They permanently shattered the traditional structures of medieval warfare.
That is a bold claim. But before we see them clash, we need to understand how these warriors were actually forged.
Right, their backgrounds are totally
It's
different.
completely different. So let's look at the knight's pedigree. The source emphasizes this intense, lifelong training.
Which started incredibly early.
Exactly, like around age 7. By their early 20s, they had mastered sword fighting, high-speed riding, and fighting in incredibly heavy gear.
It's a very specific type of conditioning.
It is. And we need to debunk this pop culture myth right now, the whole clunky, slow knight thing.
Oh, the idea that if they fell over, they couldn't get up like a turtle?
Yes, exactly. That is completely false. The text points out that knights could literally jump onto a horse in full armor.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. They could move surprisingly fast and fight for hours. So, okay, let's unpack this. They are basically medieval super soldiers.
I wouldn't go that far, but
I mean, how does a guy fighting for a paycheck beat someone who was biologically bred for war since second grade?
well, what's fascinating here is the distinction between training for a fight and living in a constant state of survival.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
So training is theoretical, right?
Yeah.
You're in a courtyard, you have rules. Mercenaries didn't have that. They lived in actual war.
I mean, sure, but they were just peasants who picked up spears, right?
Not exactly. They weren't tied to land or kings. They traveled. They fought in different countries under totally different leaders.
So they were vagabonds.
Professional campaigners. They learned what actually works in the mud, in the rain, and more importantly, they learned what gets you killed.
But doing a sloppy technique in the mud doesn't make you a master.
No, but surviving it does. The mercenaries' crucible is that they ruthless discard anything that isn't practical. A knight holds on to chivalry. A mercenary holds on to whatever keeps him breathing.
Okay, fine. That pragmatism sounds great in theory, but let's look at an actual head-to-head encounter.
Let's do it.
The duel,
Yep.
one-on-one. If we look at psychology and pure physical dominance, the knight wins easily.
I mean,
Just look at the equipment. The armor covers almost the whole body. They have long swords, lances for charges.
it's sure devastating, yes.
Right. And maces and warhammers designed literally just to crush armor. Plus, the psychological terror of a knight is insane.
The shock value is definitely huge.
You have a highly trained warrior on a massive horse moving at 25 miles per hour. It's loud, it's fast, and it breaks enemy morale instantly.
I will concede that in a fair, structured duel, the knight likely wins.
Thank you.
But, and this is a huge, but mercenaries do not care about honor. They don't do fair.
Well,
A highly experienced mercenary is going to exploit weak points.
Hmm.
They will outsmart the predictable knight because they fight dirty.
fighting dirty doesn't stop a charging warhorse.
No, but grappling does. Half-swording does. Because mercenaries lack the burden of chivalry, they are far more adaptable. They'll drag you into the mud and slip a dagger through your visor.
Ugh, brutal. But, okay, maybe in a street fight. But war isn't just a series of one-on-one duels.
Exactly. And that is exactly where the mercenary shines.
Wait, really? On an open battlefield?
Oh, absolutely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, large-scale, open battlefield clashes fundamentally favored the mercenary.
I highly doubt that. The knightly charge was the undisputed king of the battlefield for centuries.
Until it wasn't. Because mercenaries utilized coordination and formations. They used ambushes and ranged attacks.
But the shock and awe of the charge.
Think about the historical examples in the source. The Swiss pikemen.
Oh, the guys with the giant spears.
Right, 15-foot pikes. They stopped cavalry charges dead in their tracks using disciplined infantry formations.
I mean, if the knights just run blindly into them, sure.
They often did.
Yeah.
And don't forget the English longbowmen, who just destroyed armored knights from a distance. Mixed armies started defeating charging knights regularly.
But the knights had traditional tactics that worked for hundreds of years. Direct, honor-bound combat.
And that tradition became a trap of predictability.
A trap? How?
Knights get exhausted fighting in that heavy armor, especially in the heat or the mud. Their reliance on direct combat made them totally predictable to a smart mercenary.
Okay, you're obviously leading up to Agincourt.
Of course I am. Agincourt is the prime example.
I mean, the mud at Agincourt was basically up to their knees. That was a terrain issue.
It was a tactical disaster. The knights insisted on the vanguard because of personal glory. They crowded each other, got bogged down in the mud, and were picked apart by practical fighters. Predictability cost them badly.
All right, I will concede the point on Agincourt. That was a bad day for the purists.
A very bad day.
But let's pivot to the long-term reality of warfare. Winning a set-piece battle is one thing. But what about winning a years-long campaign?
This is where it gets really interesting economically.
Because mercenaries have a glaring massive weakness: loyalty.
Ah, the loyalty argument.
Yes, if the coin stops, they literally just leave. They switch sides, or worse, they turn on their employer.
Well, it's a business.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The text points out that mercenaries actively avoided risky fights.
Because dead men don't spend gold.
Exactly. They preferred negotiation, bribery, or just delaying. They are like a sketchy contractor who leaves the job half-finished if the check clears late.
That's a funny way to put it, but
How do you build a war strategy on that?
because, despite their greed, they were full-time professionals. Let's look at the knights' reliability.
They were sworn to their lords.
Yes, but they were incredibly expensive, quite rare, and they had limited service times.
What do you mean limited?
A king could often only call up knights for like 40 days a year. They had obligations back home, they had crops to manage.
Okay, so it was a seasonal thing.
Exactly. You can't run a 5-year siege with guys who had to go home every autumn. Mercenaries were organized soldiers capable of fighting year-round.
Assuming you could pay them year-round.
Right, but as economy shifted, rulers figured out how to manage that cash flow. Over time, having a standing full-time army made mercenaries the vastly more effective military asset.
So it basically became an industry.
Completely. The shift from feudal loyalty to liquid capital.
Okay, so let's synthesize all of this for the listener because we've covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah, let's break down the final verdict based on the sources.
All right, if you need a fighter for a localized duel, or if you just want pure psychological presence and fear on the field, I am still proudly claiming the knight.
For shock and awe, absolutely, the knight is unparalleled.
And I have to admit, you made a strong case if you need organized warfare, long-term effectiveness, and a warrior for a prolonged real war.
Then you want the mercenary. Structurally, they just make more sense.
Yeah, it really seems like it. While knights ruled the consciousness of Europe for centuries, it was really the practicality of disciplined, paid soldiers that permanently changed the structure of warfare.
Practicality beat pure power. Every time.
It really did.
You know, it leaves you with a pretty wild final thought to mull over.
Oh, lay it on me.
If the history of warfare proves that practical survival almost always defeats rigid, honorable tradition,
Right.
what does that say about the true value of chivalry when you're facing an enemy who simply treats war as a business transaction?
Man, that is a dark but fascinating way to look at it. Next time you picture a medieval battle, look past the shiny armor.
Look for the guys fighting for the coin.
Exactly. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. Keep questioning the history you think you know.